In Quadriga this week, Germany's new role, the reluctant leader. The Euro crisis has gifted the German Chancellor with more power than any of her post-war counterparts. The burden of expectation is great, but this new lead role has also stirred up old hatred and fear in some quarters. On the global stage, Germany also faces a balancing act. NATO partners would like to see Berlin increase its commitment to the alliance. But at home, many Germans themselves are uneasy about growing military involvement abroad. Is it time for Berlin to cut free from the past and step up to the plate? Your host this week is Melinda Crane.
So, hello and welcome. Is Germany leading too much or too little? That's one of the things we want to talk about today with three people who have been following German politics closely. And they are Christiane Meier. She's a political correspondent for the German television network ARD. She covers foreign affairs and the Chancellery, and from 2000 to 2007, she reported for ARD's Washington bureau. Ramesh Jaura is the global editor of IDN In-Depth News and Global Perspective magazine. He helped found the German Global Cooperation Council, and he's the author of The Fettered Giant. And finally, Judy Dempsey is a columnist for the International Herald Tribune, and she's also editor-in-chief of Carnegie's Strategic Europe. From 2000 to 2004, she served as diplomatic correspondent for the Financial Times in Brussels, covering NATO and EU enlargement. Mr. Jaura, your book, The Fettered Giant, was, of course, written in the waning days of the Cold War. Today, things look quite different. Has Germany cast off the fetters? Is it now the unfettered giant?
Well, to begin with, I'm only one of the authors, a co-author, and the book was published in 1981, so 9 years before the two German states became one. And the interesting point is, at that time, none of the authors, and there were 30 of them, ever thought of two Germanys merging together. But why did we call it a fettered giant or a giant in chains? The reason behind that was that it was an economic power. It has, it's quite high up in terms of military within the NATO. It has worldwide connections, but a giant in fetters for the reason that it was not completely a sovereign state until the two German states merged with each other. Now, of course, now the question arises, has Germany become unfettered? It hasn't, and it cannot become unfettered because there is a very burdensome debris of the past which we just cannot ignore. That's one point. The other point is that Germans, whether it's the people or most of the politicians, realize that in today's world you can achieve much more by being a soft power than being a hard power. Even though Germany has gone beyond being a soft power, let's say in the Balkans, now in the case of Turkey or in Afghanistan, but basically it cannot become a hard power because of the given situation.
I want to come back to hard power in the sense of military power. Let's stay with the soft power idea for a moment. Judy Dempsey, at the time when the two Germanys did reunite to become one 22 years ago now, surveys were done 2 years ago showing that Germany is now one of the most well-respected and well-liked countries, actually, in the world. Has its soft power become something that its neighbors are comfortable with, would you say?
Well, Germany likes to be liked in any case, all over the world, because of its past. In any case, every country likes to be liked. That's the key thing. But as for the soft power, I'm not so sure about this soft power element, actually. Germany actually is uncomfortable with soft power. Soft power means police training. Soft power means taking care of catastrophes. Soft power means crisis management. And quite frankly, the German position and role in soft power, particularly in training the police forces in Afghanistan, has not been particularly good. And also, Germany's role in soft power in the Balkans, and it's not only Germany, it's actually Europe's as well, it's been highly questionable. But altogether, Germany is rather schizophrenic about what kind of role it should be taking now, not only with the euro crisis, but particularly now that Europe is reunited and, of course, since America is looking away from Europe.
Let's stay for a moment with the euro crisis. There have, of course, been increasing complaints from some of Germany's neighbours, from some of the southern European members of the Eurozone, about Germany's imposing its austerity ideology on them. Would you say that many other European countries are actually now, in the course of the euro crisis, less comfortable with German leadership, including the soft power of economic models and ideas, than they were 2 years ago?
I think they're uncomfortable with the particular kind of German leadership because it's an ambiguous German leadership. The Chancellor Merkel is not a passionate European. She's not passionate about European integration. She's passionate about her country, the national interests of Germany. And in some ways, the German government here hasn't articulated its actual national interests when it deals with Greece, Spain, or Portugal. In that sense, I think that the German communication skills could have been much better in reaching out to these countries. But so at the moment, the leadership is rather flawed.
Christiane and Meier, ambivalence about leadership is, of course, also implied by our title, the reluctant leader. How comfortable are Germans with seeing their country throw its weight around more than it had in the past?
I think Germany wants to be a player, that's for sure, but it doesn't want to play the rough games. So we want to be important, influential, everywhere involved, but we have great problems taking over responsibility when it comes to military acts, and also it is not easy to sell to the German public when you take over power, meaning risk, meaning paying eventually for something, to sell that to the public. And that is probably what you meant when you said ambiguous power. I think that the Chancellor is trying to sell that inside Germany more than outside, and she does that by saying, if we are not part of Europe, we are not going to be important. It's bad for us. You know, we will not be able to keep up our leading role, and it will be economically disastrous. So we need to be in the middle of Europe, and we need to take a risk, and that is good for us.
Ramesh, would you say that Germany's perceived new strength is really more a result of new ambition on Germany's part, or of greater weakness simply on the part of other Eurozone members, for example?
I think it's a mixture of both. Even the reluctance derives from the fact that the Germans and the German leadership do not want to go beyond a certain point. They don't want to cross the Rubicon. They are not the United States of America. And I think I would welcome this attitude. There's something positive about this ambiguity. We don't need in this world more and more military powers which keep on bombing everywhere around the world for regime change or whatever not. We need powers like Germany, which might be ambiguous, but which basically try to move in the direction of a culture of peace. And I think that is extremely important.
But do you see that same kind of ambiguity in the economic arena?
Well, the economic ambiguity, in the economic arena, that cannot be separated from the general state of the world. We are living in a globalized world. And the German economy is not only based on Germany itself. It's a part of the global economy. So the weakness and the strength of the German economy, they are interrelated, and they're a part of the globalization.
If I can pick you up there. This economic leadership, I mean, the economic leadership has been focused on German interests, not European interests. Now, it is true that Berlin...
But is that surprising?
This is what you touched on, the kind of political culture that Germany has inherited. That political culture was absolutely anchored on European integration, monetary integration, political integration. And that kind of fervour and that kind of commitment, and I dare say that kind of vision, has not been expressed here in Berlin over the last 2 or 3 years. Instead, it's national interests, not the idea of much tighter European integration, which should be the logical consequence of this euro crisis.
Christiane Meier, are you convinced by that? Haven't we seen the finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, pleading for a great deal more European integration?
Yes, I think so. I think actually that there is this plea for more European integration for various reasons. Maybe it's not passion only, that might be the case. It's pure necessity. And at the same time, it is difficult to sell Europe. We all know that, because Europe is such a weird, big, monstrous thing for many people, and you have to break it down. And then in crises like this, you know, you have to break it down to maybe national interest, maybe to economic interest, to all the little, you know, parts in it, and that's what she tries. I don't want to defend the government or anything. I just think there is a certain passion for Europe, especially with the citizens.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, Wolfgang Schäuble, the finance minister, is a staunch advocate of Europe. Yeah. And without his voice, we would get the impression that Germany wasn't even in the EU sometimes. I mean, I'm being devil's advocate here.
I think Greece would deny it.
Yes, Greece would deny this. But I think the problem now with selling Europe, as you mentioned, is that the German citizens, while they want Europe, they're saying, hang on, who's going to pay for this? So this unfettered Germany actually is about being able to speak openly. Hang on, if we have to pay for it, we want to say, and actually we're not going to finance countries that actually don't look after the finance properly. So there is this new confidence by the taxpayer and the government by saying, okay, we will pay, but there's a price for this now.
And isn't there some legitimacy for that?
Absolutely. There's complete legitimacy, but I think it's got to be sold much better, not only to the German public and the taxpayers, but it's also got to be a much wider European phenomenon as well. Germany can't be isolated in selling this. They need much more support, and I think the government here in Berlin must really push more to make this a pan-European issue.
There are some rather contradictory demands being placed on Germany also. If you look at the southern Eurozone members, they're saying, hey, Germany is too dominant, it's imposing its austerity ideology on us. And then on the other hand, we hear other countries like the US saying we need more German leadership, also different, in a different direction, but more of it. How is a country to come to terms with those conflicts, Ramesh?
First of all, it is not unfettered. It can't be unfettered because it's a part of the world political system, and it cannot take the role of the United States of America, which even the USA does not have today, because things have changed. Now, those who criticize Germany for not taking the leadership, they want Germany to do things which it is not doing. Others who criticize Germany for not taking the leadership, they criticize it for doing things which it is doing. So, I mean, this is...
It's not exactly a win-win situation.
Not at all. It depends on... Every nation has its own interests, and there's nothing wrong about it. The United States has its own interests. Germany has its own interests. Of course, things have changed since we started building up Europe, since we started building up the community of 27 nations. The world has changed. So we can't expect Germany, or Germans for that matter, to be better or worse than others. I think the Germans are doing their best, and they are doing their best even to hold Europe together. Let's not forget about this former colonial power, the empire called the United Kingdom. What is its contribution to Europe? Let's ask that. What kind of a big contribution is France making to Europe? So why do we keep on bashing Germany? Why?
Well,
you see, it is a 27-nation community. Of course, Germany is a very strong economy. And there also lies its weakness. You know, it's like an elephant.
That, of course, is the reason that so much focus is directed at Germany. But Christiane Meier, if we look at the statistics we're seeing now, for instance, the Bundesbank projections for 2013, it's looking like the German economy is going to slow down. Germany emerged from the economic crisis actually stronger in many ways, and certainly stronger than all of its neighbors. But is that sustainable?
Probably not when you believe what the economists say. But I don't know, so far we were quite surprised, I think, by the fact that Germany actually made a profit out of the crisis. Let's, name it. That's what happened. Because so far all the risks we took have paid off, and it's not absolutely sure that this is going to last. But at the moment that's the case, and maybe the economy will slow down, yes. But then again, we are at a point at the moment which is really very comfortable. So I think we are going to survive. It slows down a little bit, but of course for the other European countries that's not a very good sign. And at the same time, maybe it takes a little bit, a little pressure off, And you just mentioned Great Britain. I've been asking myself, what are the Brits doing for Europe, actually? Because I can't really see anything.
It's all relative, in other words, Judy Dempsey.
Isn't it very interesting? I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And Germany needs strong economies across Europe. And the flip side is that the countries of Europe need a strong economy in Germany as well. They both need each other. So there should be no kind of schadenfreude, oh, we told you so, Germany, you're doing very badly. This is the first point. So a strong Germany, and hopefully that it won't go into recession, because that would delay Europe coming out of recession. And of course, we have Germany's most important trading partner outside Europe, which is China. And if China slows down, Germany slows down, and Europe slows down. And as Christina says, there's no winners here.
Just one little point I would like to make. I think apart from all the hard facts, economic facts, security facts, there's one very important point, and it's the tone. I think Germany has to, and that is what we, the Germans, always have in the back of our minds, the tone has to be right because of our past. So we can't walk around and bully the rest of Europe around, We have to be really careful.
You report on the Chancellery. Is the Chancellor's tone the right one, starting out from the perspective of Germans themselves? She's cautious. She's not a great orator. Her rhetorical skills are modest at times. Is that actually exactly what Germans want?
I think she's pretty much like most of Germany. I mean, she's like the reincarnation of the type of, let's put it that way, as Germans would like to see themselves. Relatively modest, but at the same time pretty strict and strong and straightforward. And that is probably the secret of her success, that she's not one of those people who sort of show off and have the big rhetoric. She might be rhetorically not a total winner, but I think that is exactly what people appreciate here.
What do you think, Ramesh, Jaura? How much of Germany's new position on the world stage has to do with the Chancellor herself?
Well, quite a lot, but that's not the only factor. Quite a lot, because the way the Chancellor moves around the world affects. I mean, let's go back, whether it's Adenauer or later on Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt. So the way they moved around the world, that really had an impact on the minds of people around the world. And I wouldn't compare Merkel with Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt or Adenauer, for that matter. She is an entity by herself, and she comes from a generation which is a different generation. And yet, I think she imbibes the basic qualities of Germans and what the Germans want, as you said. And that is something good about it.
Judy Dempsey, Merkel's tone and style significantly different from prior leaders, and a real influence here in bringing Germany in a new way onto the world stage?
First of all, she's a woman, which really matters. I mean, especially in what is perceived as a conservative Germany. Secondly, she's not flashy. She does a, and I see what Christiane is saying. She's got this attitude of, this is how I see the world. She doesn't boast, and she's not corrupt either. There's been no whiff of scandals coming out of the Chancellery, no abuse of power, no free flights here and there, no tinge of abusing her authority in that sense. So, and I think she has hit a. Let's hope this. She has hit something special in the German psyche. Schröder was her predecessor, Gerhard Schröder. He was he had something to prove, given his upbringing and his cigar smoking and with the boys and everything. But Merkel has clawed back something that has given the Germans that confidence, we're in control. We might not be liked by everybody, but we're in control and we can trust her. Merkel is a safe pair of hands. I think that's the common perception.
She's herself. She's herself. She's completely sovereign in herself. She's not looking for media publicity.
No,
as Shuruda did, for example. So she's not a kind of a prisoner of the requirements of the media. She goes and speaks when she wants to, and that is something good in today's world. But everybody wants to address the media and fool the people all around. She doesn't fool the people.
Christiane, Meier, lots of hymns of praise here for the understated leadership style of the Chancellor. Do you want to cast any skepticism?
No, understatement puts it well, but she shouldn't be underestimated. I mean, she's really, we call her a Machiavella. She's really a powerful woman, and she knows how to use her powers everywhere, inside and outside Germany. So in a way, she's hiding behind this facade of modesty and statement. So for her challenger, it's going to be pretty tough to come up with a personality that really is worthwhile for the Germans to, change from one party to the other. And I think it's going to be a very interesting election campaign.
I'd like to move into the security arena now. As I promised a moment ago, much of the attention, of course, also on Chancellor Merkel, does tend to focus on the Eurozone crisis and her leadership there. But the fact is that her government has also taken Germany into new roles abroad in the military and defense area.
A generation ago, images like these would have been unthinkable. German soldiers on a military mission abroad. But slowly, Germany's political class seems to be getting accustomed to troop deployments of this kind. All parliamentary parties, bar the Left Party, backed the latest mission to send Patriot missiles to the Turkish-Syrian border. One exception to this trend, the government's decision to opt out of any involvement in Libya last year. German military engagement abroad remains controversial among the general public. Few are willing to accept the human cost of engagement in conflict zones such as Afghanistan, and fear any increase in German military might in the light of the country's past.
Ramesh, Jaura, back in those old pre-unification days when you wrote the book, which you have brought with you, The Fettered Giant, Germany was, of course, at pains to avoid all appearance of military might. Has that changed?
That has changed, which I don't welcome, for the simple reason that you cannot bring about international peace by sending armies everywhere around the world. And secondly, I think in that respect, Germany has to become a little bit more self-confident. For example, when in 2011, the UN Security Council voted on Libya resolution and Germany abstained for whatever reasons, it was later on ashamed of itself for having abstained, along with, imagine, India, Brazil, and Russia. I mean, as if India is a banana colony, or Brazil for that matter, And a lot of Germans came up with strong criticism why Germany did that. I think that is the kind of attitude we need to not get involved in day-to-day politics. The superpowers, or those which still regard themselves as superpowers, they have different interests. Interests which do not coincide with those of Germany. And I'm very much against the military engagement of Germany. It should not be there. It should work more in the direction of bringing about peace, furthering a culture of peace.
In the old days, Judy Dempsey, of course, Germany was known for checkbook diplomacy, much preferred paying some money for other people to do the fighting rather than doing it itself. And it was a very fervent supporter of European defense and security integration, largely because it hoped that that would obviate the need for a national military presence. Is European integration on the defense and security front a dead letter at this point?
That's putting it mildly. What is astonishing is that not since 2007 have the governments of Europe, the heads and states of Europe, sat down at summit level to discuss security and defence. That is quite astonishing, and that predates the euro crisis. This is the first thing. And secondly, it has seemed that Europe has forgotten Joschka Fischer, who was the Green foreign minister under the coalition in Schröder. It was that government, the red-green government in Germany, which is quite an irony, that actually agreed to send soldiers to Kosovo, that agreed to support the NATO bombing of Serbia, and agreed to send soldiers to Afghanistan. That was a major, major breakthrough because responsibility and power go together. And in the post-Cold War era, the region, Europe, became so potentially unstable. Look at the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the wars in the former Yugoslavia. And I think that was a remarkable shift in the government in Berlin. It just moved to Berlin by then, that they made this huge decision, and successive governments have had to go with this. That's been the change. And I have to disagree with you a little bit. There's sometimes that military power is necessary. Would we have stopped the ethnic cleansing and the killing in Kosovo without NATO going in?
Most probably, yes. We didn't try. Did we try?
I think we spent 10 years negotiating with Milosevic, and I was involved in those negotiations at the time, and I covered them. And I think actually the government at the time in Berlin, and indeed France was involved in this, and particularly Britain, Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister at the time. I do think we had a moral responsibility to stop the killing.
Yes, but did we negotiate in the way we should have?
That's the benefit of hindsight, of course.
Yes.
And historians are already criticising the Dayton agreement that stopped the fighting in Bosnia. And I agree with it, not that Bosnia is indeed now a perfect democracy or stable, far from it.
One could also question whether it was a wise decision to recognise Croatia.
Good question.
Yes.
All these questions are really complex. And what you just spoke about is the moral question, basically. Should we or should we not use violence, power, whatever, should we use our military? And that is the big thing, the big problem in Germany, that we are very, very reluctant. And since nobody has really developed, as you say, a European defense strategy of any sort, what Germany does, basically, as far as I'm concerned, is hiding between the United Nations. So as soon as there's a mandate through the United Nations, we feel we can and we have to be part of it, basically. If we are not, we feel ashamed. So that's basically our reference board. The United Nations. It's not the European countries necessarily when it comes to military.
But what is the United Nations? I mean, United Nations is dominated by the Security Council members, and these are the 5 permanent Security Council members. So they all have their vested interests. So they are not interested in international peace, which is irrespective of what their own interests are.
We have German soldiers right now in Kosovo still. We have German soldiers on the Horn of Africa. Germany has just sent Patriot missiles to Turkey, basically to help guard Turkey against possible incursions due to the Syrian conflict. And Germany's talking about possibly sending some troops to Mali as well. You would say all of those missions are not useful in trying to keep the peace?
They are not useful. They don't bring about any sustainable peace. Do we have sustainable peace in Afghanistan? Is Libya better now than it was before? Is Iraq now better than it was before? Are there human rights being observed? Is there real democracy, according to Westminster kind of democracy in all these countries? So these are the questions we have to ask us, even though in the hindsight, but still.
And you know what? These questions are being asked here a lot. This is why the German parliament has to mandate everything. So wherever we go,
which is good.
It has to be, which is very good. And I think it's really good democratic rules. I was going to bring in another point that apart from sending out troops, Germany is doing something, as far as I'm concerned, much worse. We're sending weapons. The export of weapons has dramatically grown under this government. Okay. And they go to Saudi Arabia, to unstable countries everywhere in the world. And I think that is something that is not being talked about. And it is
5th largest arms exporter.
And there's no mandate there. This is all dealt with in secret.
The Chancellor has, however, explicitly defended those arms sales before the Parliament, saying we are an internationally active country. We have interests everywhere, and we need to be, we need to basically play the game of realpolitik.
That's where the schizophrenia lies, no?
Just one sentence. I think her idea or her pragmatical approach, she's always so pragmatical. If we send weapons, we don't have to send soldiers. And sending soldiers is, of course, a different thing. You have a different, or from her point of view, different moral obligation to defend that. And so it's a way out to say, okay, we give you all the weapons, but if possible, we will not be involved.
It's terribly complicated.
It is.
Yeah.
What you're up against is values and interests. Can you keep them separate? And when they do clash, what are priorities? And the German justification for sending weapons to Saudi Arabia is for border security. Well, we know exactly what sort of regime Saudi Arabia is. Yeah. And Germany and Europe made huge mistakes in propping up authoritarian regimes across North Africa and the Middle East before the Arab Spring. On the other hand, we have then the situation where Germany has the moral obligation, the values to protect Israel. So we have the quasi-interests on the one hand with Saudi Arabia and the fundamental moral values with Israel. But essentially, this government has run up against what many governments do run up against. How are you going to reconcile interests with values? And it would get back to the whole realpolitik question.
To what extent is it a function of this government? Is this particularly a CDU posture, for example? I'm looking at some quotes from an essay written by the Defense Minister Thomas de Maizière entitled "Where's the Debate on Defense Policy?", in which he advocates a very visible, unabashed international presence for Germany. Is that particularly a position of this government, this particular party, or would you say that runs across the board? We've seen a real change in attitude.
I think we're seeing a change in attitude, and it has been going on for a few years, and it's going on, and it's not discussed as much as it should be discussed. So, because as you said before earlier, it's ambiguous leadership, and that describes almost everything. We are here, and we are there, and we are everywhere, and then we say we only want to negotiate, and then we say, for example, Israel, we don't really take a stand against anything, but also not for anything, and that is also part of this ambiguity that we don't really know where it leads us. Maybe it's not so bad to be that way as long as you don't know where you go, but it has to be discussed, and there has to be a moment where you find a line into this or that direction. And so we're still at the situation we can't please everyone, you know. If we negotiate, it's wrong. If we don't negotiate, it's wrong. If we go in, it's wrong. If we don't go in, it's wrong.
You can't be everybody's darling, you know. That doesn't work. Yeah.
Ramesh, Jaura, next year there will be elections in Germany. Would you expect an SPD-led government, Social Democrat-led government, to do things differently? Same question, essentially. Or do you think that this is a shift that goes across the political spectrum in Germany?
Which government will come into power depends on the electoral mathematics or arithmetic. That depends on that. But I don't think the next government will be completely different from the present government, as previous SPD-led governments were not different. And it was mentioned before that, above all, I mean, among all the persons, Joschka Fischer, belonging to the Green Party, who wanted Germany to be out of NATO, was the first to plead for the Germans entering into the Yugoslav war, you know. Before that, even the Social Democrats were against the two-track decision of Helmut Schmidt. In fact, he was chucked out of the party, you know. So things have changed. But I don't think has to be any intrinsic conflict between values and interests. It's a question of synchronizing these values and interests. And I look towards a world which is not ruled by arms, but which is ruled by values. And the most important value is peace. Because if we do not bring about peace in the world, we will never end the wars.
Do you see any country playing a leadership role and doing it right?
Well, somebody has to start, you know. There are countries who do. I mean, Germany does its part, India does its part, but there's yet not the complete kind of force that we require, not the kind of stamina that we require, not the burst that we require. It has to be more. It has to be much more than we have now. But everybody actually wants peace. Go to anybody and ask, do you want war? The people will say no.
excuse me, it's all very well talking about peace, but you had a quasi-peace in the Middle East under authoritarian regimes and no human rights.
That's not peace.
I'm
not talking about the peace of the graveyard.
I just want to make the...
I'm not talking about peace about the graveyard.
I know, but I just wanted to make this point. Just one thing, whoever wins the next election, which will take place in September of next year, sooner or later, Germany and Europe will have to discuss or come to some idea of having a security strategy for Europe, which will not contravene the UN legal norms or NATO. But what is lacking at the moment in Germany and in Europe is actually discussing the idea of strategy. Values and interests are all very well in parallel with each other, but if they are not underpinned by any kind of strategic doctrine, I think then they will permanently clash with each other.
Is that perhaps the dilemma, Christiane Meier, that also unites the economic and the strategic realm, that basically with international institutions and organizations in every field, weakened, credibility issues arising, in some cases organizations in search of any mandate at all, there's a renationalization of power, both in the economic and military arena, that basically makes it inevitable that a strong country like Germany has to take a stronger leadership role than it did in the past?
It may be the case, but I don't want to believe that. I struggle because I think the European concept as such is so totally successful. I mean, we got the Peace Nobel Prize, and for a good reason. And I don't think renationalization is something we want to have. I don't think Germany wants to have that, and I really hope it's not going to happen. I really liked Jean-Claude Juncker when he said, you know, if you doubt the concept of Europe, go to the military cemeteries. And I think that is a very wise remark, and this is why I really try to educate my children or to talk in favor of the European idea, because I think that is a path to peace eventually.
Judy, Dempsey, you say we need a new European strategic idea, an aspiration, but where's that going to come from?
It's certainly not going to come from France. It must come, well, the Poles, for instance, under Prime Minister Tusk and the Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski, have been thinking about this, coming up with the idea of Europe working much more together, not indeed for military campaigns, for preventive crisis management, these issues. It's got to come from the member states who have to feed it into Brussels. I don't mean to sound bureaucratic, but the member states will be suspicious if Brussels takes the lead. And so Brussels is waiting for the member states to do something. And of course, with the elections coming up here, or taxpayers or people afraid of the war or Afghanistan, or they're tired of it, or they're not looking beyond the European crisis, it's not going to come for some time, but it should.
Ramesh, Jaura, preventive efforts. One area where Germany has expressed some aspirations is as an honest broker, whether in the Middle East or perhaps also in Eastern Europe. Is that a role that Germany can play with credibility?
It has a very great potential of playing that role effectively, though not alone, together with other Europeans and together with people beyond Europe. Because you cannot bring about peace all over the world only by fixing yourself on Europe. And the role I imagine myself for Europe is that of a peacemaker, and not going back to the days when it colonized people, the empires and all that, but a role which brings about peace. And Europe has that potential, especially as the United States is now a little bit weak than it was before. So it should do more to bring about peace, but it has to change the mindset, which is very much military-oriented. Without this, Europe will not be able to make peace within itself or without.
I'd like to know, before our show comes to a close, we're beginning a new year, where you see the most important areas for German leadership, be it reluctant or avid, where you see the greatest need and the greatest potential for German leadership. And I'll start with Christiane Meier.
Well, it's obviously the economic situation that worries people most, and I think that is where everybody's waiting what's going to happen, because it influences so many parts of our lives, and that is the kind of leadership we need, and I think we have in a way too. And apart from that, of course, the security aspect, but I think people don't really think about that so much. You know, they only think about it when it really comes up. So altogether, we also have, if you go into politics in Germany, of course, we have a big problem with the society going, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and there's something that is really waiting to be solved. So there is really a big necessity for somebody to say, you know what, we are still one society, we belong together, we had this idea of chances for everyone and of solidarity, and we want to reinstate that and really be what we used to be, the sort of social, democratic, weird, responsible community we always were. And I think there's a big leadership problem.
Judy Dempsey, your New Year's resolutions for German leadership?
Deal with Russia. Energy security and deal with Russia. I mean, President Putin is going to be in power for how many more years, no one knows. And we know that Chancellor Merkel is no great friend of Mr. Putin. But, we have big issues of energy security, of pipelines, of gas, but above all of human rights and how Russia is going to unfold over the next couple of years. It would be great to see Germany pulling together with Europe to have a very strong, coherent policy towards Putin 3.
Ramesh, Jaura.
I wouldn't focus myself on Putin or Russia for that matter, but I fully agree that what is required is social solidarity. Go back to the good old days when there was a feeling of social solidarity in the society itself, which is very strong, particularly in one part of Germany, which is now part of the whole of Germany. And then, of course, a policy which is security-oriented, but not with a mindset of armed forces, but peace-oriented at the same time. And I think this is what the Germans want, but people everywhere in the world want.
You mentioned earlier the role of the United Nations Security Council. It's long been a big discussion here in Germany. It would like to have a seat on the council. Would that make a difference? Should it get one?
I think the United Nations needs complete reform. And you cannot have permanent members of the Security Council because it doesn't reflect the real state of the world. And whether Germany becomes a member of the Security Council is not going to change the world. But the Security Council has to become different than what it is today.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and a very happy new year to all of you and to all of you out there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.